Hello. It was Saturday for me. I started off, I was going to do a video, a chatty type video to get comments on what we could call socialism of Europe and free marketism of the United States, and how either or whatever might move better forward in the future. But I was taking notes and trying to write out not a script for it, but a frame that I could talk from. And it's completely changed to a presentation now, because I'm going to do a lot of talking. Or if I don't do the presentation, I'll do this video with, I think I've only got 3 things I'm going to read from. But the reading that I'm going to do, I think, is probably a better introduction to getting towards what might be called socialism and free marketism, and whatever might be the way forward. Whether that be it, or whether another type of change is going to move us into something that's obviously neither, because the United States is not free market and Europe is not socialist. But if you wanted to talk about them, the United States is moving towards being socialist, and the Europe is moving away from being socialist to being what the United States is, and they're really so overlapping now that it's very hard to absolutely carve out one is one and one's the other. There's so much that overlaps. Anyway, so what I'm basically saying, that this is the start of what might turn out to be a much bigger conversation, and obviously somewhere along the line we're going to grab our information about banks, banking and central banking to try and make sense of things. Because even when we talk about central banking, let's talk about the Fed for the United States. How can we call anything that's got the Federal Reserve sitting there behind the banking system and call it in any way free market? They are setting the interest rates, they are bailing out banks when they run into trouble, etc., etc. It's not in the slightest bit free market. So I'll go on with this, because I think this is, as I say, I think this is a decent angle in. It's a book I've found called Double Entry, written by some lady that isn't on this part, but if you follow the link, I've just ordered it from Amazon for myself, and there's a delay on it. So I don't know if you want to go to Amazon and order it as well. You'll probably find a delay. Maybe there isn't in the United States, but we'll see if we can get going. Get going. Okay. So this is it, just slightly into a book review of the book What I Am Talking About. Back in the 13th century, when Venice ruled the waves, we can find the origins of modern capitalism. Back then, the portents were vague. No planning that this is going to be capitalism, obviously. It was just an idea. But the invention of bookkeeping and the introduction of Arabic numerals foreshadowed a revolution based on the stunningly original idea of being able to figure out whether or not your business was making a profit. Yeah, we're back in the 13th century in Venice. Numbers that we now use, Arabic numbers, were introduced, and now we're going to get to double entry bookkeeping. Roll forward 600 years and we find that those inventions they were, suitably adapted, have not just stood the test of time, but have insinuated themselves into every nook and cranny of modern life. Welcome to the world of financialization, where earnings per share is an imaginary number and money is the only objective measure of everything. Only it isn't. Next paragraph, entitled Cost-Benefit Paralysis. despite the inauspicious title Double Entry, the name of the book, has a fascinating and relevant tale to tell, cutting a swathe across history from the creation of double entry bookkeeping, probably in India, through its documentation by Luca Pacioli in 1494 and its viral spread via the introduction of printing. The idea that bookkeeping underpins and may have even been responsible for capitalism itself is an underlying theme, and a fascinating one. However, it's when the story reaches the 20th century and bookkeeping turned into accountancy, and accountants became the arbiters of what is right and wrong, that the tone turns to a darker shade. Three factors contributed to this: the increasing complexity of accounts, the creation of national accounting systems, and the widespread introduction of cost-benefit analysis as the basis for decision-making. Okay, for this one we're kind of going to concentrate on the middle one there, the creation of national accounting systems. I am. The development of the concept of national accounts based on the concept of double entry bookkeeping, aka GNP, gross national product. We normally use GDP, gross domestic product. There's GNP's stuff that stays in the country. GDP is everything, even though the profits might go out of the country. Ireland's the best differential between GNP and GDP. Loads of multinationals are placed in Ireland. They kind of technically make the money in Ireland, increasing the GDP, but then immediately steal the money straight out of Ireland, leaving it with GNP, basically. So, based on the concept of double entry bookkeeping, aka GNP, it's largely spurred on by John Maynard Keynes's attempt to quantify the economic status of countries during and after the Second World War, has led to nations increasingly focusing on this single number as a measure of its economic health. As Keynes and many others have pointed out, this ignores so many aspects of a nation's critical performance that it's nonsense to rely on it alone. Gleason White, she is the writer of the book, quotes Bobby Kennedy's famous 1968 speech approvingly. So I'll have a swig of cocoa before I go into it, because I think I'll tell you about it afterwards. Bobby Kennedy, 68, hitting it. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children. Allow, it doesn't account for. The quality of their education or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it tells us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans. Now, I'd like to note here on the socialist free market and all that sort of thing. 1968 was a goodly while ago, but our fathers, let's say, wherever they might have lived, are more likely not to have laughed at Bobby Kennedy. We would now laugh at Bobby Kennedy for just about every word of that, knowing that our countries do not stand for any of that blah. But our fathers thought that they did, and to a greater extent, back in those distant days, America did stand for a lot more of that sort of stuff. The United Kingdom did, France did, etc. The implication is that it has been bookkeeping, accounting, numbers that have pulled the rug out of from under ideals. And it was ideals that were the underpinnings for what we could call morals, which would have kept bankers from saying things like, yes, I did that, it wasn't against the law. It was a bit dodgy, but it wasn't against the law. It went against a moral code, but it did not go against the legal code. In Bobby Kennedy's day, they would not have done that because it went against the moral code, not the written black and white code that everyone seems to want to go by now. Unfortunately, as is often the way of these things, it's easier to rely on an objective number that doesn't mean anything than subjective ones that do. Sorry, I must have read that badly because it doesn't seem to make sense. It's easier to rely on an objective number that doesn't mean anything than subjective ones that do. I'll go once more time because I've got it now. It's easier to rely on an objective number that doesn't mean anything than subjective ones that do. You know, subjective, morality. I don't think that's right, I will not do it, as opposed to numbers or letter of the law. In other words, if we can fiddle the accounting numbers and get it past the accountants, it's good, although it's morally wrong. Or it's not the letter of the law, so I can go around it. Morally wrong, letter of the law, good enough. Okay, so I think I've thrashed that one to death as the introduction. And I'm going to go back to the Financial Times and Martin Wolf now. What I thought was a triptych sort of attack on what the hell are we going to do, especially with the debts that we've got, has turned into 5 now, and he has finished because this is the summing up of those 5, and he's got 7 numbered bullet points at the end. So I'm going to give the last 2 paragraphs and the number 1 bullet point, and we might come and do more later. Okay? Just keeping this together. Okay, so this is the end of Martin Wolf's 5 things of what the hell are we going to do. For a big country, and he's based this on the United States, as I said before, because we've talked about these a couple of times before. For a big country with a global currency, such as the United States, exchange rate targeting seems inappropriate. So Martin's saying, I should not worry about them bringing the US dollar exchange rate down if it goes past 84. It's inappropriate. I think they will, but there we go. So the central bank might target other asset prices. And again, this is market manipulation of the absolute first order. In order to gain greater credibility for the new policy, it could adopt a new target, a price level target, for example. That would be a nominal, let's just say an inflation at 4% instead of 2%. That would be the shorthand for it, or at least one idea. Or a target for nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is before you take the inflation rate off it. If you've got, wildly, GDP of 6 and inflation of 4, you've got to take the inflation of 4 off, yeah, to get your real GDP, because 4% of those extra numbers was just people paying extra for it. So your real GDP number is 2. Inflation's 4, giving you a nominal GDP of 6. In order to gain greater credibility for the new policy, it could adopt a new target, a price level target, for example, or a target for nominal GDP, the big number. But it would have to show determination in trying to hit this target. Not most. There's a great wodge of economic blogsters who are saying NGDP targeting is the gear. It's the way to go. All such policies should be regarded as complements to, not substitutes for, resort to the government's balance sheet as a cushion for adjustment. In brief, we should accept large, temporary my arse, fiscal deficits as part of the price of returning the economy to health after the crisis. Japan, chuck huge quantities of money, and it's a deal between monetary and fiscal policy. Monetary policy is the central bank, fiscal policy is the government. They should get together and bloody well do something. Or I will finish this series of posts on balance sheet recession by making 7 concluding points, and I'll just hit you with one. First, if an economy is to escape from the legacy of excessive accumulations of private debt and public debt without a prolonged depression, this is what this whole thing has been to avoid, a prolonged depression, because it's a waste of resources, human mainly, and permanent damage to productive capacity, it is vital that policymakers, yes, lever pullers, gits, should be devoted to that end. Permanent damage to productive capacity. It is vital that policymakers sustain the growth of nominal GDP at minimum. Don't let depression happen. Don't even let recession in the door, because it just makes debts harder to pay and just contracts everything, and then you're fighting against a depression, not just a recession. Macroeconomic policy should be devoted to that end, provided the country retains the necessary policy freedom as the United States does. What he's saying is they can print their own dollars, they can do what the bloody hell they like with the money aspect of things. So hopefully there's enough there to start us off. We've got in the air the idea of what Johnny was talking about. If they can get through this period, this recession, depression, deflation period, then government should back off out of the way and try and let the economy run forward. Europe would never do that, but which would be better? Now, you've got to take into account, and I'll just leave this as at the end, if that is to happen. Now, I'll throw this in, as I was going to leave this to another video, but if you're going to back government out and let the free market take over more in America, let's say, you've got the central bank sitting there. Banking system will still be whirring away just like it is now. So you'll never get your free market out of a banking system like that. Okay. And another thing is that you're going to have a free market globally, and you will have a free market against China. You will be putting your manufacturing costs up against China. You will be driving your wages down and down and down. You'll be bumping into Marxism, where the people working in the factories competing with China will not be able to buy the products that other people, everybody is manufacturing, because their wages have been driven so low. Yeah. If you're free, if capital is free to do that sort of thing, that is what it'll do. It'll drive wages down as low as possible. Yeah. The only way that could work, in my humble opinion, is to close America. If you closed America, you could do it. You could have a free market in America. But if you want a free market and you want a global market, you're going to drive those American wages down right towards Chinese wages. You'll be on 2 hamburgers a day instead of 2 bowls of rice a day. There is no way you can do it. It just wouldn't happen. We've got to where we are now, borrowing huge lots of money, public and private. It's that borrowing, that huge quantities of money that have made for things like iPhones and big flat screen televisions. If we hadn't borrowed that money, the iPhone and the flat televisions probably wouldn't exist. And if they did exist, iPhones certainly wouldn't exist. But if we had flat screen televisions, they would just be for the hyper rich that could afford them. The reason that we've got them is because the world is borrowing money to pay for them. It's such a complicated thing that hopefully you've got enough things there that have been attracted in your mind, and you can write comments and presentations, whatever you like about it. But I think somewhere in all of these things is the basis for what we need to talk about how things might be going forward. Leave it with you. Bye.